Your Excellencies, Honourable Minister, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Mellissa Wood and I'm the Director of the Australian International Food Security Centre, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here today to our Food Security Conference. Over the years, I've met many of you in your own country, so it's very special for me to be able to welcome you to Australia. We're moving on to the next session here, and I'll be chairing until lunch. We've heard from Monty about Africa's vision for growing Africa, and I would also now like to pass over to my colleague here to talk about Australia's commitment to this vision of growing Africa. So I'd like to introduce Mr. James Batley, the Deputy Director General of the Country Programs Group of the Australian Agency for International Development, AusAID. And as such, I would say that James and his organisation represent our closest partners in the work that we're doing in Africa. So can you please join me in welcoming him? Thank you.
Thank you, Mellissa. Your Excellencies, Honourable Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to represent AusAID here today at this conference, particularly in the company of so many of our very valued local and international friends and collaborators. Today I'd like to talk to you about Australia's aid program, both in general terms, but also more specifically as it relates to our work in Africa. And I'd like to talk about our work in the field of food security and how we'll work with the new Australian International Food Security Centre. I find myself in the position where the Minister has just stolen all of my best lines, so if you happen to hear me repeating something that he's said, please forgive me. Just over a year ago, the Australian Government announced a new aid policy titled An Effective Aid Program for Australia. The policy provides a strong foundation for the continued scale-up of Australia's global aid program, and it's a foundation built on the principles of more effective aid, greater value for money, and greater transparency. The government's policy document explicitly identifies food security as one of our 10 key development objectives. And in the policy, it's the objective is expressed as follows: improving food security by investing in agricultural productivity, infrastructure, social protection, and the opening of markets. So, we continue to scale up our development programs across Africa. Just 5 years ago, in 2007, we delivered programs worth $90 million to Africa, to 24 countries in Africa. This year, our program in Africa will total over $350 million, not counting our contributions through international and multilateral agencies. And we're delivering programs in all 49 sub-Saharan African nations. We seek to make a practical contribution where we have relevant experience and expertise, and in the areas such as agriculture and food security, natural resource management, and particularly mining, in water and sanitation, and also in maternal and child health care. To support our work in these areas, Australia is also delivering a significantly expanded Australia Awards program in Africa. And this year we're providing scholarships to over 1,000 Africans. Last year we provided over $140 million of humanitarian assistance to Africa. Much of this was in response to the devastating drought and famine in the Horn of Africa. Australia will continue to be a major and early responder to humanitarian crises in Africa. However, our food security investments and partnerships today are focused on reducing the need for the international community to support such sudden and massive scaling up of humanitarian operations. And indeed, a number of African countries today are showing that they have the capacity and the skills to produce the food needed to feed their populations, even in difficult times. So, as the Minister said just a few moments ago, agricultural development is a key driver of economic growth and poverty reduction, and that's why it's a key element of our aid program in Africa. So, what does Australia bring to this issue, and what is our approach? Well, Australia has learnt, and it's learnt often the hard way, to adapt our farming and agricultural practice to get the best out of our country's fragile soils, unpredictable and changing climate, and modest water resources. In overcoming our domestic agricultural challenges, we've built strong expertise in dryland and tropical farming, climate change adaptation, commercialisation of agricultural research, and water and soil management. Our support for improved food security in Africa builds on African and global initiatives to boost long-term agricultural productivity through research, adoption, and technical capacity building. Our major food security programs in Africa are implemented in partnership with a number of the organisations mandated to implement CAADP, as outlined earlier this morning by Professor Jones. And our objectives in partnering with African organisations are twofold. Firstly, to help Africa develop technologies that respond to the needs of local producers, and second, to encourage local farmers to adopt more productive and efficient farming practices. One of our key food security partnerships in Africa involves Australia's CSIRO and BECA, based in Kenya, and I welcome the strong representation here this morning from BECA. That partnership is designing vaccines for major livestock diseases and developing better monitoring and control options for aflatoxin, the maize pathogen that threatens lives and livelihoods across Africa. And through ACR and its partners in Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania and Uganda, Australia is supporting food security by driving the development of more productive maize and legume cropping systems for poor smallholder farmers. As the theme of this conference reminds us, bridging research and practice, good research done by good African and good Australian scientists is not enough. We need to ensure that this research results in benefits for the poorest and most vulnerable communities in Africa. Good research needs to result in improved farming practices. It needs to result in increased incomes for farmers and reduced food prices for African communities. And for this to happen, we need to ensure that research is linked to and influencing decisions by governments, but also by the business sector, by farmers' organisations and by non-government organisations. It's important we remember that smallholder farmers in Africa produce 90% of all food on the continent, a point that was brought home to us earlier this morning by Zimbabwe's ambassador in her remarks. Research has to be relevant and able to be practiced by those farmers if it's to result in real development impact. And just finally, turning to the Australian International Food Security Centre, from AusAID's perspective, the centre will help Australia to do more by strengthening our ability to facilitate widespread adoption of agricultural innovations. We see it as a force multiplier. It will increase Australia's presence in Africa and greatly enhance the coordination of Australian government food security activities across the continent. something that can only be welcomed. So in conclusion, AusAID remains committed to the objectives of improving food security, sustainable economic development and poverty alleviation in Africa. We will continue working with African governments, institutions and African society to ensure our investments in food security align with African priorities. And we look forward very much to working with the Food Security Centre in support of these objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Batley. So I'd like to continue this session about Australia's commitment to growing Africa by introducing the Food Security Centre and its strategy.
The Centre's goal is to help smallholder farmers and other poor households access sufficient, accessible and nutritious food. One proven way to improve food security is through agricultural research. Targeted investments in research and, importantly, the adoption of research outputs can make a real difference to people's lives. It can lift them out of poverty. After months of consultation with Australian, African and international stakeholders, a strategy has been developed focusing on 5 thematic areas: sustainable and productive farming systems, food markets, value chains and social systems, food nutrition and safety, communications and knowledge management, and education, training and capacity building. The consultations also led to some initial projects and scoping studies under the new strategy.
Hi, I'm John Dixon. I work for the Australian Centre of International Agricultural Research, and I work with the Australian International Food Security Centre in developing projects and managing those projects while they're implementing, especially in the area of crops and conservation agriculture, and bridging the gap between the research on crops and the adoption by farmers of those technologies. And the Adoption Pathways project focuses on understanding better why farm women and men decide to adopt technologies and what additional support they need, perhaps to adopt promising technologies like credit, like better knowledge, stronger extension, working in farmers groups, access to markets, and so on. We're bringing in a lot of experience from South Asia into Africa, especially related to two-wheel tractors, which have underpinned quite an agricultural revolution in Bangladesh. And we've got a project that's under formulation at the moment that will be the first project to bring two-wheel tractor mechanisation for conservation agriculture to small farmers in Africa. They're quite small, quite cheap and very effective, and they replace the human labour. So often it's the women who have to dig the fields before they plant. And so we've developed ways using two-wheel tractors to plant directly into the fields without having to dig the fields, so that saves a lot of labour. The question, of course, is how to work with farmers so that they can adopt those two-wheel tractors. The way to scale out and popularise the two-wheel tractors is through small-scale commercial operations in Africa. We also need to train extension workers, work with farmers groups to improve marketing, and also for sharing of experience with these two-wheel tractors or with the other technologies that go along with that, like better seeds, drought-tolerant maize, improved legumes. And if farmers can share that one to another, that often leads to the fastest adoption. We can see that the acceleration of uptake of research results needs to be spread much more widely through the region to different categories of farmers, and this will require different types of partnerships, different local partnerships and novel ways of working that need to be tested. That there would be ample scope and a great need for other investors to join along with the Food Security Centre.
Hi, I'm Les Baxter. I'm the Horticultural Research Program Manager. for the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. So this project is really about increasing the nutrition and the income of farmers in a number of Western African countries through vegetable-based farming systems, particularly peri-urban vegetable production. The project has a number of different thrusts, so it's essentially about increasing productivity, growing the vegetables better. It's about looking at new varieties, particularly of indigenous vegetables, and because of that, it has a very high focus on nutrition because these indigenous vegetables are really high in nutrition, in minerals and vitamins, often many times higher than introduced vegetables. There's income generation because what we're able to do is to replace some of the traditional crops, cereals and grains, with high value crops like horticulture. So there's that generation. And then because of the nature of production, it's also really good for gender. So it's a big employer of women and potentially of youth that comes into the city for unemployed youth. So it has a lot of benefits for peri-urban horticulture. Because of the peri-urban situation in most developing countries, Indonesia, the Philippines, this work on peri-urban horticulture has applicability in all our developing countries. It's a very important piece of work. It's a new area for ACR and we're quite excited by it. This is an opportunity to look at some new areas of work that have applicability all around the world. So other donor organisations and other organisations that do the research are certainly ones that we'll be looking to partner with and that should become involved.
Hello, I'm Tony Bartlett. I'm the Forestry Research Program Manager at the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. The project that we're supporting is called Trees for Food Security. It's all about enhancing food security and livelihoods for rural poor people in Eastern Africa by incorporating trees in farming systems. This project incorporates both biophysical research and socio-economic research. The biophysical research is trying to work out what tree species grow best in what agroecological zones so that we can advise the farmers what trees they should be planting in their farming systems. In terms of the social science, what we really want to understand is what are some of the barriers to farmers adopting trees in their farming systems, and then what types of extension technologies work well in what circumstances to try to get the farmers to understand how the trees can enhance the productivity of their crop systems. Well, in the areas that we're working in, there's over 20 million people practicing agriculture, and it's estimated that over a third of those are in food deficit areas. So if we can increase the crop yields in those areas by a factor of 2 or 3, which is quite possible based on previous research, then we will enhance the food security of those people. And in addition, the tree products also enable the farmers to increase either their livelihoods or just make life easier by producing fuel wood, because you need to remember that more than half the people who live in these areas depend totally on wood products for their energy source. One of the benefits of this project and why it's good for the Food Security Centre is that the governments in the partner countries have already identified the need to implement large-scale evergreen agricultural programs. And so our research will help them by providing the scientific information about, for example, what sort of spacings to plant the trees at and which trees to plant where. And then the benefits of the research will find their way to lots and lots of farmers, far more than we could if we just did a research program by ourselves. This is a really good project for the Food Security Centre because it's not just about research, but it's really got a very big focus on adoption of the research outputs. And we can achieve that because we're working with the national extension programs.
These early projects and scoping studies are producing early gains for the Centre and provide examples of the types of diverse projects that will help achieve food security. For example, the Family Poultry and Crop Integration Project builds off many research efforts already undertaken in the area, including poultry disease vaccination efforts. When vaccination projects started, 5 chickens were the most that anyone kept. Now it's 150. Villages are forming co-ops to market eggs, and farming families are getting the benefits of better nutrition. The AIFSC is aiming to spread results like this beyond research trial situations. The AIFSC relies on long-term collaborative partnerships to to achieve its mission of accelerating the delivery and adoption of innovations by smallholder farmers. The Centre is engaging and forging new partnerships with a broad range of national and international organisations. From researchers through to delivery and extension workers, the national country governments, private sector, community groups, farmer groups and civil society. This approach encourages new partnerships and innovative responses to complex problems. The future looks bright for Africa. A green revolution is underway and agricultural development sits at the top of the agenda, supported by African and international public and private sector organisations together with Africa's smallholder farmers.
Thank you. So you've just been introduced to some of our projects and met our research program managers at ACR and seen some of the activities that we've instigated since we began a year ago. So my role today is to more formally introduce to you the strategy of the Centre, so as we come together to endorse it. Let's see if this is working. The strategy of the Centre is really the blueprint of what the Centre will work on, where it will focus, and how it will undertake its work. What it does is it clearly identifies how we are working to support the CADAP investment priorities that we heard this morning from Professor Jones. It also provides the context of how the AIFSC fits into the current Australian aid operating environment, and we've just been introduced to that by Mr. Batley. And it outlines our rationale for investing in agriculture research for development in sub-Saharan Africa. The Centre's mission is to accelerate research delivery and adoption of innovations for food security. And this focus on adoption for impact can manifest itself in a number of ways. Primarily, it places us in the position of working at the interface between the research providers and the development providers, whether they're the public or private sector. And through our efforts, we plan to bring these groups together and to work more closely together with research projects that will deliver more powerful outputs and outcomes. For example, already in our activities on the ground, we are working on a project that's establishing faster adoption pathways. Our vision is for jointly managed project partnerships with African public and private institutions, including the NAS, which will build capacity and foster sustainability. In addition, we have already funded some socioeconomic research, and we intend to do more, on better understanding what the constraints to adoptions by smallholder farmers are, how to overcome these constraints, and to understand their approach for managing risk. And this is really where, as Australians, we have experience through managing our own highly successful agricultural sector in the face of many similar challenges to what African farmers face. We are one country that truly values and encourages the untapped potential for innovation by farmers. And perhaps the most important principle for the AIFSC modus operandi is partnerships. There are many large donors successfully working in Africa. We recognise that partnerships with like-minded donors, research organisations, national governments, regional bodies, and the African Union are not only sensible but essential for us to be really effective. And all of us here in the room today represent those partnerships that are already in place. And these partnerships can only continue to grow as we now have a greater physical presence in Africa through our new office in Nairobi. As you heard earlier today, following consultations, our office was opened in Kenya in September, and we would like to thank the Government of Kenya for welcoming us. We are also building partnerships beyond Africa to further the delivery of our impacts. And given our origins being announced at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting last year, it is fitting that we are partnering. Our first partnership is with another Commonwealth country, Canada. And we're very pleased to have Jean Lebel, the Vice President of IDRC, here with us today, representing this first formal alliance. The synergies between IDRC and ACR are notable, and we'll hear more about those this afternoon from Jean Lebel. But it makes good sense for us to come together and to focus our efforts on ensuring better research updates. The AIFSC is focused on activities that deliver against our mission in order to stay effective. And there are many worthy activities that we could get involved in. In the long run, our input may not have the impact that a consolidated effort with like-minded donors can have. And we are very conscious of not spreading ourselves too thinly across Africa, both programmatically and geographically. Geographically, we are focused on a set of 10 countries currently, where there are opportunities to leverage off existing research or policy activities that are underway, where we have good networks in place, or where there are opportunities for cross-country and cross-regional spillover. So I'm going to take you through a diagram that's in your strategy document, so you can look at it later in more detail. And this diagram provides a snapshot of our strategy. And it's the result of a series of very useful and thought-provoking consultations with many of you here today. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Professor Jones and his colleagues at FARA for their work in hosting a very early consultation for the Centre in Accra. And the results of that consultation have really underpinned the development of this strategy. So just to explain the diagram in a little more detail, the overarching policy frameworks that guide us all are the foundations of this diagram, and everything that we do is built upon those. And on top of these foundations are the lens that we view food security through. We take the broader FAO definition of food security, comprising the three interrelated elements of food availability, food access and utilisation. And improving any one of these elements alone is necessary but really insufficient to address food security, and we need to deliver on all three. In fact, you'll notice that our three research programs mirror these three elements. And the focus on all our activities, as I mentioned previously, is that of accelerating adoption and better ensuring that the agricultural innovations are put into the hands of the smallholder farmers that actually need them. Now, you heard a little bit about our three research programs in the film, and you'll hear more about those today during the panel sessions. But they broadly represent the three areas of farming systems, socioeconomic policy systems, and food systems. And the most well-developed is the first one, the farming systems program, because that's where we've drawn heavily on the ACR expertise and capability in this area to get some early projects up and running, and you just heard about some of those projects in the film. The food, the Food, Nutrition and Safety Program, we recently held a program design workshop in Africa, and that's resulted in some really clearly defined 5 focus areas that we intend to work through in the future. And our research programs are complemented by 2 capacity building programs: communication and knowledge management, education training and capacity building. But what is missing on the diagram is really the hardest bit of any strategy. What activities, what interventions, what partnerships, what novel ways to generate innovations are needed to deliver the outputs, the outcomes and the impacts that you see on the diagram. And this is where the panel sessions today will be so valuable, because we really want to harness your expert opinion to help us fill in that missing part. So these panels are here to help identify opportunities and unmet needs and really help us breathe life into the strategy. So today signals an important milestone for the AIFSC as we come together to launch the centre, to endorse its strategic direction and to celebrate its partnerships. And I'd really like to thank you for the enthusiastic support and the warm welcome that you've given us and the Australian Government initiatives more broadly. But this is just the beginning, and we look forward to many decades ahead of us of fruitful partnerships and the delivery of solid achievements. Before I finish, I just want to acknowledge my small and powerful team in the Australian International Food Security Centre. In Canberra, we have Wendy, Bronnie and Joanne, and in Nairobi we have Liz, and they're all here today, so I hope you get a chance to meet with them and to talk with them. So thank you very much.